section. So now we're going to go into reading data. All right, so here I created a workflow. These are all the questions that we're going to go through today and just some examples. If we don't have time to get through all of them, it's okay, but just going to show you different ways to read in data and things to avoid, like that. So the first one we're going to read in is a Ysdb file. So Ysdb files are Alteryx data sets. Just like an Excel file that exists within Microsoft Excel, Alteryx has its own data type or data set, which is called a Ysdb. Now we'll take a look at that. So on my other screen right now, I'm just finding that data. Okay. So the Ysdb is this Alteryx database. Address data, you'll see that it's a type. Then if I open this, it should pop up. Hello. Okay, here it is. It's behind that field. All right, so this is what an Alteryx database looks like. You'll see that it looks like an Excel file, but something about this file is that it also contains metadata, which is really important if you want to preserve your metadata coming out. So if you go to an Excel file, it may change your metadata around, change everything to a string. Same thing with the CSV, automatically converts everything into a string. Let's say you want to keep, pretty sure the score is an int 32, something like that. We'll see when we read it in, but this is going to be preserved when we read it into the workflow. So another thing to read in data. So what we did before was we grabbed an input data and we connected to that file, but something that's pretty easy. And you can only do this with an Excel file, a CSV, and an Alteryx database. So you can click on that data set and you can bring it onto the canvas. You'll see that a book pops up, which is signifying it's the input data. And dragging that onto the canvas, you'll see that now that file was successfully brought on and we are connected to it. So 2 ways to connect to a file. I like dragging it on. If you have that location open, it's a little bit easier. But okay, so now remember the data doesn't come through unless we run the workflow. We'll run it. And then now we can see now the data is brought on correctly. If we hit metadata, we can see that these values are not all V strings like they are in CSVs. There are an int62 as the type for score. Okay, is there any questions on how to read in an Alteryx database? And hopefully, Mary Lou, you were having issues connecting to your files. Were you able to do this correctly? Okay, if not, we're just going to keep going, but remember you can ask questions at any point in time. Okay, I'm not getting the option to drop. Bring it on, so like this. Drop. Is there another option? Yes. Okay, so yeah, you can either drag and drop with a database, or here I can reconnect to this file with the input data tool. So I'll bring the input data tool onto the canvas, and then where it says connect to a file or database, I'm going to find that location in my computer. Then let's go back. I'm gonna find my file with the data again. Okay, here we go. Now I'm connecting to the address data. So clicking that, it's going to populate down here, then hitting open will give you the preview down here, and then running it brings it onto the canvas. So 2 different ways to connect. You can copy and paste a file path as well. Let's say if you go in here, pretty sure if you control click, oops, no, I'm not sure how to get the path, but you can hit copy path. Pretty sure this works. And then let's see. can paste that path. So I just stole that path from my folder. Looks like there's quotes around it, so it might not work. I might need to delete the quotes. Yeah, okay, so I think there's some quotes around it that I just need to delete. But yeah, you can either manually put the path in or you can connect to it from your computer. Right, so noted, when you copy a path, quotes pop up around it, and then you need to delete those so you can successfully run it in. Okay, so now we've done a Ysdb file. The next file we're going to read in is a CSV. So we did this in the first example, but if you weren't able to do this correctly, now's a second chance to correctly read in a CSV. So we're going to grab an input data. We're going to connect to that 2013 county CSV. Okay. Then I'm going to run this. All right, so now that this is in, we can see that it's just a preview of the data since there are a bunch of lines in this data set. Was everyone able to do this correctly? Okay. Yes, thank you. All right, so now something you can do. I have 6,000 lines out of 385, and I want to see what the data looks like at a glance. I'm going to do a kind of bird's eye view of the data. I'm going to do this with the browse tool. So in either the favorites tab or the in and out, I'm going to grab this one that looks like a binocular. That is a binocular. And then I'm going to run it. So nothing pops up again until I run it. Now in the configuration tab, it's going to give a summary of the data. So if you're working with a really large data, you want to look at the frequency that exists within that tool. You can open this configuration tab and you can see all the fields at a glance. So I'm just going to close this. Hello. Then you can see all these field names, so employee name, job title, they all correspond. And if you click on these, it'll go to that summary directly. So if I go through, it'll give me the min, max, average, and so on. Down here, you can see the frequency of every value here. Job title is the, oh, where did you get the configuration tab? Yes, so I put the browse tool on the canvas, and then I ran the workflow, and then I clicked on the browse tool. So yeah, make sure, Russell says make sure the binoculars are highlighted. Yes, so you should see a blue box around, and that'll specify what tool you're using at the moment. So you can either scroll down through all these fields and then see, I think the frequency is what shows at the front. So deputy sheriff is the most common job with 8,000 records containing that, and so on. You can click on them here, see more in depth. So this metadata, let's go. So employee name is a string. Actually, they're all strings, so they're going to give the same analysis, but the min, max, average, this is talking about length statistics. So whenever it's a string, you know that it's about length. So the minimum length is 2. So we have a job title with 2 characters, and then we have max job title that has 106 characters. And then if you're using numerical data like an integer or a double or a float, you can then see the minimum and maximum based on numerical data and the average and so on, standard deviation. So just by clicking on these, you can view. To get back to all the fields, you can just exit out here. So if you have a really large data set, you want to know what's in it, this is where you're going to look. All right, the next file we're going to read is an XML file. So I'll show you what that looks like. I'm just going to open it first on my computer and show you what this looks like. So an XML file, if you've used it before, looks like this. Really messy, kind of stressful. You can't really look at data at a glance here unless you're very talented. But here, everything is nested and it's in XML form. So I'm just going to read that on and show you what that looks like. So I'm going to grab input data. Then I'm going to connect to that transactions XML. And the beauty of Alteryx is you don't even have to parse this at all. It just automatically parses it for you. So opening this, and then you'll see that the file format changes. So here you specify what kind of file it is, XML, and then you can change some settings in here if you have a more complicated XML. This one's just a basic one right now. There's no root elements or anything of the sort. Then I'm going to run it. And now, from that stressful data set we were looking at before, we now have a beautiful, clean data set that is all sorted out for us. Is there any questions here? Okay. All right, we'll go to the next example. So let's say you have files in the same folder. They're all named similarly. Let's say you run a method every single day. So your files are named workflow 1, workflow 2, workflow 3, and so on. So they all have the same schema, but they're all separate. But you want to bring all these in together so you can look at them all at once instead of bringing them all in separately and joining them together. Something you can do to do this is a wildcard. I have some slides prepared to kind of walk through what these are. Okay. So when you're reading in multiple files, you're going to modify the path field. So you're going to read in, if you think about the input data tool, we have the path that's at the top left that connects to the file on your computer. And then you're going to use an asterisk as a sort of variable to replace information in. So this is the path currently. We have a San Francisco, we have a asterisk here. So when you put an asterisk here, it's going to replace a variable. So we have 2013, 2012, and 2011 that all exist within this folder. So I want to read them all in, and I want them stacked on top of each other. So putting the star here, it's going to take in all of those. Now this variable represents multiple characters, not just one. And there's also different ways that you can write this. So we're going to use first the method that was used in the slide, and then we'll go through all the different types of examples we can also use. So I'm going to connect to, first thing you're going to do is connect to only one of these. So I'm going to select San Francisco 2011. You don't have to change anything, but this is just to get the path correctly. So now that I have the path correctly for this folder, I can then replace this here 2011 with an asterisk. So you can manually type this if you want and put in the asterisk, but I like to get the path first to just make sure I'm going to the right folder, and then I'll go and I'll update that variable. So now we'll see what that looks like. Actually, let's just run in 2011 right now. I'm going to put a browse tool. So we'll see that things change once I put that variable in. So with the browse tool, this data set has a year. That year corresponds to the year in the name. So we have the year is 2011. So if I scroll down to 2011, year is the only one that exists, 2011, and there's 36,000 records here. So I want to read in the 2012 and 2013 as well. I want them all in the same data set. So I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to replace this year with asterisk. Then we will go in the browse tool and see what has happened. Okay, now going to the browse and scrolling down to here. Might take a second because now this data set's really large. We now have 2011, 2012, and 2013, and you'll see that we have 110,000 records. So there's 36 records from each file that we're all bringing in. They're all vertically on top of each other now. Christopher says, when bringing in multiple files with the asterisk wildcard, do all the files have to have the same column headings? So, great question. If we click on the canvas, you'll see here that there are some errors. So, well, not errors, these are warnings. So the warnings are from the input data tool. So it's saying this field has a different field name than the first set. So it's still appended them on top of each other, but it's just giving a warning saying, hey, these names were different. It's still going to read them in. So hopefully that answered your question, Christopher. So they should have the same amount of fields. That's the only thing that will error, but it'll give a warning if the field names are different. But we can take a look at these files.
Here, a quick question on that. Say the field names are different, but how can we tell that they matched them up appropriately? So I see the warning where it says employee, you know, that it's different, but how do we know put it in the field we want it to go?
Okay, I think my volume's kind of low. I couldn't really hear your question much, but I think you asked what would you do to fix this?
Yes, but also how do you know that the field names are different, but how do you know that it placed it in the correct fields? How can you verify?
So you would do that with the browse tool. So what I did here, the best way to verify is something that specifies each file separately. So let's take a look at the actual data. So this 2011, and I think it's the 2013 that has the different file names. So let's put these at a glance. Actually, no, it's a 2012. So here we have, where's the 2011? Okay, don't know where the one is named differently. I guess it's this one. Okay, yeah, so you'll see that these are in the same format. We have employee, job title, base pay, and so on, but these have an underscore in between them. But you'll see that year lines up with year, total paid lines up, all of them line up together, and then something that specifies these differently from each other would be the year. So if you take a look at the 2012 file, all the years 2012. This one's 2013, and this one is 2011. And to make sure that they're all in the same column, looking at that browse tool and scrolling down to year and seeing that now we have all of these values in the same one, you can verify. Oh, someone asked, I think he's asking if there's a way to adjust the mappings of different files. So yes, I'll show you an example at the end of this training in the blending data section that we're going to blend these together, and we're also going to move the fields around based off of our knowledge. So if they are named differently and they're in the same order, we can still read them in by using a different tool by just moving them around manually. And I will get to that in the blending section. Russell asked that, oh, the SF13 fields were all lowercase. Yeah, so the 13, they were lowercase and there was an underscore in between, and then the other two were the same. So in these errors, it says San Francisco 2013 has a different field name, but remember, it's still right in those 2013 files, because if we look in the year, we can see the 13. And if we look in the input data, it says 37,000 records were read from this file. Here, the 2011 and the 2012 are also brought in. So you can make sure also through the messages of the workflow. And yes, Russell said it looks like it changed 2013 to match the other two files. That's exactly what it did. It took the column names from the one on top, so the 2011, so this column names, and then it just stacked them all on top vertically. Okay, so we did that with an Alteryx wildcard. Now, also what I'm doing to make these boxes is just using a comment tool. So you can write in any text, you can change the colors, background color, add a picture, whatever you want to do here, but just doing this to show you things as I talk. So let's think about different ways that we can read in this file. So the Alteryx is a variable. Does anyone have an example of another method that would work that would still read in all of these files? And create a field that contains the file name too, that can help identify what field the data came from. Yes, that's a great point, Jeffrey. Thank you for mentioning that. If you want to create, look, output file name as field. If I hit full path or file name only, I'll see what that looks like here. Now look at the browse tool because this data set is so large. Now we have all these file names at the bottom so you can see where they're coming from. And if you want to get the full path, you could do that as well, but file name is a little bit cleaner. Thank you, Jeffrey. And again, how I did that was output file name as field. Before it was selected as no, but then I just hit file name only. Okay, so the different asterisk methods. Let's go through these. So let's get the San Francisco. And then I can also put a star here instead of dash star because it's still going to read that in. Let's do 20. So this asterisk is now going to replace the, let me make my font bigger also. Okay. All right, that's a lot better. All right, so this is still going to read in those files because they are still in the same format. If there was a 1997 file, it would not be read in with this method. Okay, let's do San Fran. This would also work. It would read in everything. There's a bunch of different combinations you can do, and it'll read in all of those. Let's say you're trying to read in San Diego, San Francisco, and San Antonio. Then you could do this, and it'll read in all of those files. So there's a bunch of different ways. If anyone wants to make an attempt and send it in the chat, and then we can try it and see if it works. If not, we can move on to the next wildcard method. Okay, so the next method we're going to do is a question mark. So similar to an asterisk question mark. Let me show the slides. All right. So using the question mark is only going to account for one character. So asterisk, multiple characters, variable. The question mark, only one character. So notice that when I put a question mark here, it's going to read in all three of these files because they're in the same format. But 2006 would not be read in because there's no one in this format. So let's try that. We're going to connect to the San Francisco files again. We're going to read in all of those. And what I just did there is I took a recent file. So we bring in the input data, connect to this. You can see all your recents, and then it's easier than just looking through all your files. You can just click, and it'll bring that on automatically. All right, so we got the 2011 file on. Does anyone want to take a try and see if they can read this in? Without, that's not the same method that was on the slide. So you can write your answer in the chat if you want to try. Okay. If not, if no one wants to try, I will show you a new method. So if I did 2 question marks, this would still read in. Okay, since they're all in the same format, then we can see this has 110,000 records, which we know these each have 30,000, 34,000 around there. So then we know that all of these are read in correctly. Okay, different mark methods. Okay, does anyone want to share an example of something else that would work? Okay, I'll start typing. If I did 4 question marks, it would read that in. If I did 3, nothing would read in because there's no year with 3 digits, unless you're really far back in time. Here, it would read in those correctly. And Francisco to, so read in everything from the 2000s. And I could even put question marks for absolutely every single character. I'm just going to guess that's the correct amount, but you can do something like this. You can use as many question marks as you want. You can also use an asterisk wildcard mix into here as well. But you mentioned 0 or 1 characters, right? For example, file 1, file 2 would all be red. Yes. Yeah, so if you put, let me type this out, file star, it would read in all of these. The file 1, file 2, and file 3. Like that, it would read in all. And you can also do file, question mark. So as long as they have similar schema, then you can do this. I'll delete this. Fusion. Okay, is there any more questions before we move on to the next exercise with wildcards? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is use a dynamic input tool to read in multiple sheets. So let me pull up an example. What we're going to use is the San Francisco data year file. Now open this to show you what this looks like. So we have this file and we have all of these lines of data. And they all are the same going from tab to tab. So you'll see, scroll through, we have 2003 all the way to 2018, I believe. But if you click through, then you can see all of these. But they all contain the same column names, they all contain the same information, they're just information from different fiscal years. So instead of reading these all in separately and joining them together, what I'm going to do is use a method where I'm going to read in all of these at the same exact time, and they're going to be stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to close this. Something to note, if you are reading in a data set, you can't run it if it's open in another tab. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if you ever get this error, you know why. I'm just going to minimize it. I'm going to bring it onto the canvas. Just going to select a tab. And then when I try to run it, I'm going to get an error saying, hey, this is open in another program. So it gets down to the bottom. Oh, I guess it's still read in. No. Oh, I think it's because I have the 2014 tab open, not the 2003 tab. But if you have a file open, it's not going to read it in because I have the other tab. But okay, so what we want to do is read all of these in together at the same exact time. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to bring on the input data tool. Now, this is going to be a different method than we have done before by just reading in the file and selecting a sheet, something like that. What we're going to do is we're going to connect to the file still, and I'll show you where things change. So controller San Francisco data year. I'm going to open it, then it's going to give me options to select from. So I can either select a sheet and use this drop down or select a range from the sheet, or I can import the list of sheet names only. Now, this is a example that I'm going to do, I want all the sheet names, and you'll see why we're doing this and what happens. So once I hit that, we'll look at the preview. And then now we have all these sheet names in here at the bottom. So if you remember at the data set, we had all these as tabs, and now they're in a list. So the next tool we want to use is the dynamic input tool. So we're going to grab the dynamic input. And it is in, I believe, in the connectors tab. No. Developer. So you can either grab it for here, from here. I should save this close by because I always use it, but I'm going to save it to my favorites tab so I don't have to keep searching for it. But usually I just search for it because I don't want to find it. Then I'm going to click it and I'm going to drag it onto the canvas. Now, this is where we configure it and say, hey, we told you all these sheet names from this file. What I want to do is connect to the file. I want to give a template of what all of these sheets are going to look like. Then I'm going to say, read every single sheet from that list that I specify. So first I'm going to put a template. So I'm going to connect to that data year. And since all of the sheets are exactly the same, they're not exactly the same, they have the same schema. They can each serve as a template. So I'm just going to hit 2010. Then we're going to hit OK. I'm not going to change anything within here. I'm going to hit OK. And so now I have this. This is my template data now. So then I'm going to specify a list of data sources. Now this is you're choosing a field to select from. The field that's connected into here is called sheet names. So what I'm going to do is select that field, sheet names, and then I'm going to change the file /table name. So now it's going to take every value in this sheet names, and then it's going to take this template, go to the file, and then change that table name sheet from sheet names. Okay, Emily says, I need you to go over that again. Yes, thank you. This is a kind of complicated topic. I'll start from scratch. So what I did was in and out, I brought in input data and I connected to the San Francisco year file. Also, if anyone feels like I'm going too fast, please let me know. Don't worry, we are actually ahead on time, so, oh, from the dynamic input, okay. Okay, I'm just gonna read in the sheet names. Again, I'm gonna grab the dynamic input, bring that on. Then the template is going to be the file, the original file. So San Francisco data year. And I can select any of these since they're all in the same schema, so they all serve as a template. Okay, so I'm selecting that sheet, hitting OK. And then once that runs through, I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to select a data source. So the data source I'm going to choose is the sheet names. So it's going to run through one by one. See, coming in, we have these sheet names. Oh, I need to run the workflow. So coming in, we have these sheet names. And then now with that file name, it's going to get the first sheet name, grab it from there, from that file, take the second sheet name, grab it from that file, and so on all the way down. So one by one, it'll bring these on to the template, connect to that file, and then stack them on top of each other. So now coming out of the dynamic input tool, we can see fiscal year is going to be our kind of, what's the word, where it stands out. So this is going to be our focus column. So then you can see we have 2003 that was read in, and all the way down, you'll see that this year increases. We had everything up until, I think, 2016, 2014. So now we have all of these tabs vertically on top of each other now that are read in. Another way to verify this is going on the messages. So if I click on the canvas, you can see the messages of the entire canvas and every tool that's on the canvas, and it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes. If you want to see what's happening only in a specific tool, I'm going to click on the dynamic input tool, and then I'm going to click this 3 box thing. If you hover over it, it says messages. These are the messages for that specific tool. So scrolling, we have 1,860 records were read from 12 different files and queries. So taking a look here, all of these sheets were read in correctly, and they are now stacked on top of each other. So a way to view the messages again, click on the canvas, you can see everything and see that tool. So you can either filter it by clicking on the tool. Here, show those, and it'll bring you to that tool and highlight around it. Or you can just hit messages and then you can see everything here. Okay, so now hopefully everyone was able to do that correctly. If you want, I can go over it again, or any questions that were, anything that went wrong, just let me know and we'll go through it. Okay, I want to bring something else to your attention. You'll see in the results pane, there's these colors at the bottom, and you'll see these little triangles on the cells. So this is giving you your data at a glance and showing you what's going on with your data just by looking at it. So the green means okay. So if you hover over it, it'll say 100% of these are okay. So if you're colorblind, this is a way to differentiate between these colors, unfortunately. And then yellow is going to signify that there's null characters. If I hover over this, so there's a little bit of yellow, that represents a percentage. So looks like it's 20% yellow, like 80% green. And if you hover over, it says 23.23% of these values are null, and the other remaining 76% are okay. So they'll change, and then you can see that the entire bar is filled up because this is a small data set. If we look up at these, we're only looking at a preview of the data. So the green only goes to a certain amount. And this dashed diagonal line signifies that this is partial results. So if you hover over, 5.86% are showing they're all 100% okay, but you can only see 5% of the data right now in this results pane. And then the next color would be red. Don't think there's any examples of red, but red means not okay. So probably having to do with leading or trailing white space within the workflow. So let me find an example of that embedded new line. So red pops up here. Usually it's not up in the top, it's in the cell in the top corner. If you hover over it, you can see the error that it's showing. So this says this cell has embedded new lines. So if I double click this, you'll see that there is an enter in between. So whenever someone created this data set, they typed out this information, they hit enter, and then they put the rest of the information. So there's a way to fix that. We can parse through this later if you want, but just something to note that you can't see everything in the data sometimes, but these you click on, you can see. That's another way. If you have a lot of information in your cell, you want to see everything. Let's find something that's really long. See a ... here. If I double click on that, so this didn't show up before. Since I double clicked on it, then this window pops up, and then I can actually scroll through that cell and see everything here just by making this bigger, like this. I think it pops up like this, and then you have to pull it down. But that's just if you want to look at a cell, a specific input. You can also copy and paste from here if you want to drag things and drop things. But okay, is there any more questions here? Okay. So is there a way to use Wildcard when the source data is in multiple subfolders? Unfortunately, no, they need to exist within the same path, but I'm sure there's a way around that if you used a wildcard in a path. I think that would work. But that's a great question. Kevin, if you want to send me an email with your question, I'll put my email in the chat. Then you can text that to me, and then when I get a chance, I'll research it and let you know. Okay, so there's my email. If anyone wants to ask me questions, I'll answer them in my free time. So just send them to me. There's my email if you have any questions that were unanswered. Okay, now what I'm going to do is give you a question. So let's say example. In a folder, I have the files. Let's see. I have these file names. Let's call them CSV. Okay. They all exist within the same path. What I want you to do is write a wildcard for all of these using, actually write 2 wildcards for each. Write 2 wildcards for all of these using the asterisk method and the question mark method. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes to figure this out. And then I want to go over these and we'll write out all the examples we have and see what we can come up with. Okay, so just gonna put a timer up on the screen. And then we'll go over that answer once this timer ends. Okay, so we have 20 seconds left. Hopefully everyone was able to do this successfully. If you want to start maybe sharing your examples, you can just throw them in the chat and we'll take a look at them. Does anyone want to share what they came up with? Okay, so we have out. Okay, so Jeffrey sent star CSV. That would work. All of those in. Let's see, we have Brian who sent this. It would also work. Andrew and Eric sent in the same exact thing. They sent this question mark method. Unfortunately, actually, I think this would work, reading in the question mark because there is two. Okay, the one would not work, the one question mark, because there are two characters in some of them. Elliot sent in so I think that was an accident, this first one, but this should also read in. So let's say these were Excel files or any of the other sort, we'd still read those in. Okay, or no, sorry, Melina, not Elliot. All right, so everyone did a great job. Would you need both question marks, one or two? You need to have two. So the zero, here, let me show you this slide again. This is 0 or more, and the question mark is 0 or 1. And I can send these slides out if you want to come back to look at these later. Oops, I think I stopped presenting instead of exited out of my PowerPoint. Start presenting again. Okay, we are back. So I will send out these slides and everything as well. So if we want to look back at these, you can. Okay, so these are all of the examples that I had for reading data. We are 30 minutes ahead of schedule. What I'm going to do is stop recording. Unless there's any more reading data questions, we can go through any questions you have, examples, but just let me know. Then I can end this recording and we can go on the break earlier and possibly get out a little bit earlier, depending on the schedule. But for now, if you have any questions, let me know before I stop the reading data recording. Okay, I will stop the recording now.